Good morning and welcome to today's LinkedIn Live session, which is part of a series of content I'm hosting to support the launch of my upcoming book. There is the front cover. It's called Planning for Success, a practical guide to setting and achieving your social media marketing goals. The date that it will be available on Amazon is still to be confirmed, but it will be this month. Hopefully I will have that confirmation shared any day now, just waiting for file uploads to all go through. So today I'm diving into some other research, some insights that came out of work I did with Professor Laura Chamberlain. You may have watched those LinkedIn Live sessions and qualitative interviews that we did as part of our project. And in those conversations, and also in the day-to-day conversations that I have with many people working as social media managers, the phrase use of social media requires a cultural shift comes up. And to make things happen with social media, we need to involve more people across the organisation, sometimes outside of marketing and comms. And sometimes that needs to be more than embracing how-to training. It's those phrases of organisational culture, culture change, mindset change that we need to embrace and get on board. So I thought, who better to join me and dive deeper into this topic than Mark, who we have worked together. I checked this out, Mark. I think it's nearly 6 years that we've worked together.
That's
and we speak every week about work and about this topic and our observations. So I was really excited that, you know, we can actually go live and let other people hear the conversations that we have about change. You've worked in this area for many years. You've got a toolkit, which I will share some of those resources for those watching in the chat. So, Mark, thank you for agreeing to join me for this session.
Yes, and thank you, Luan. And as we'll find out today, culture is a very interesting topic in the sense that whilst people kind of hear the word a lot, it's a word that's everywhere. But often, you know, people don't really understand fully what it means. It's very easy to say, very hard to actually put your finger on specifically what it is. So in terms of my own sort of background, I've been involved in sort of change and transformation within organizations now for 25 years. And one of my kind of intros into that, I suppose, was with the music sector as the internet came of age. They had to sort of suddenly lurch from being fully physical business, selling CDs into shops, to being a completely sort of well, not completely, but a partly online business. They had to grapple with new business models, etc. And you know, they had a culture that was suited to selling CDs and vinyls into shops. What they didn't have was a culture that was used to the digital age, and they had to essentially evolve themselves very rapidly around that. And so that's kind of where I kind of got my interest and a lot of learning, watching as they grappled with that particular problem.
Yeah, and we often talk about, don't we, you know, there's changes and coming back and, you know, vinyl, and we could talk about the music stuff all day, but we won't. We'll stick to change. And you're right, it's that thing that we use this phrase and we know it's there and it's around us, but it's quite hard to grasp what that really means. So we're going to dive into that. I should say this session is live. If you're watching it live, thank you. I can see that there's lots of people joining. Please do use the live chat, which will be down the side of your screen. I've got an eye on that. I shall look out for any comments that you've got, any feedback, any questions. We can take those live as well. We're aiming for about 30 minutes on this session. So we have said this is a difficult topic, but I do like to start with definitions and scope. So can you give us some definitions, quotes, phrases around this topic, Mark?
Exactly, yeah. So I'll have a go. So if you think, the best way I always think about culture is, in the end, it's a set of habits and behaviors. So we all have our own individual habits, things we do every day, things we do unconsciously or semi-consciously, you know, things like brushing our teeth, driving a car, things that we don't think about, things that we're automatically doing. And that is the same is true in business as well. You know, we have the ways we interact with each other, that builds up over time. And we hear, you know, cultures go bad simply because old or inappropriate or unuseful behaviors begin to creep in. And in the same way that we have our own habits, those habits develop at scale in groups and in organizations. You'll spot them. You'll have maybe a habit. You'll see habits amongst people where they're constantly bickering with each other, constantly attacking each other's ideas, or personally even. Or you may have a habit where people are fearful to speak up, for example. These are things that develop over time, and there's a saying around culture is if you don't design your culture and actively create the culture you want, a bit like our habits. If we don't create the great habits that are going to serve us well, what can often end up happening is we fall into bad habits which don't serve us so well. And the same is true of organizations. And I think there's another side of it. So not just the habits and behaviors that sort of crop up and that become the norm within that business. There's also a set of shared values. And again, a bit like, and we identify ourselves as a certain type of person. Quite often, we may say that we're an adventurous kind of person, or we're a more conservative sort of person, and as we do that, what happens is we tend to stick to that identity. The same is true of organizations. I had a good example the other week of an organization where we were looking to essentially relaunch a CRM process or platform where it hadn't gone particularly well. And one of the things we're looking to do is engage a whole bunch of salespeople around the real reason for doing it, which had nothing to do with the CRM system and everything to do with what they were reaching for. So we started to look at a vision for change. And what happened, what came back from the leaders of that organization was they loved the sort of more out there, really sort of emotional plea, if you like, to the salespeople. But they identified themselves as a little bit too conservative, so they wanted to go something a little bit less out there, which is fine, But it just shows that they, as a group, identified themselves as perhaps a little bit more at the conservative end, as in a pharmaceutical sector. So these are sort of the combination of the behaviours within each other and how the groups of people identify themselves, how the organisation identifies itself. I think that's, for me, a useful way to think of culture.
I was nodding along to that, and I'm sure other people are. And so, we know it's there. And for some of us, we know how that makes us feel and others feel as well. But if we're thinking about this issue around there needs to be a change to make things happen or to get buy-in, what can we do, from my point of view as a marketer, but perhaps other business leaders watching this as well? What could we do? Where can we start?
Well, I think like all habits, whether they're good ones or bad ones, there comes a point. Let's take a bad habit, for example, or a habit that we don't want or that's not going to serve us well in the future. There comes a point where we have to, think of a habit as a sort of pattern of behavior or pattern of actions that we do time and time again. At some point, something happens, right, where we say, right, that's it. That's not going to work for us anymore. Yeah. Whether it's a relationship you're in or a health regime or bad health habits that you've got into, there comes a point where we go, right, that's enough. Yeah. And the things that we've been saying, I should do this or I should do that, all of a sudden become this is it, I must do this. And then all of a sudden the switch goes off and we change that habit. So we do a sort of pattern break, so we've got this pattern, all of a sudden we break that pattern. And that's true of any organizational change too. So with a group of people, this kind of almost habits and behaviors, this identification that they have with being a certain type of group or certain type of organization, somehow or other, to sort of adapt the culture, there has to be a pattern break. And a good way to do that is to set out a very clear and compelling reason why it matters, okay? And it has to be two parts to that. One is why staying as you are is not a great option. So one of the key things when change happens at a personal level, if you think about it, is that all of a sudden we come to a realization that this isn't working anymore and that actually now is the time to fix it, okay? And when we come to that realization, we're suddenly open to a new idea, a new change. And then, of course, what we need is, so what do we do? And, what is our goal? What is our sort of vision that we're going towards? And so when you want to adapt a culture and you look at all of the best culture change examples around the planet, I mean, Microsoft actually is a great example of an organization that really shifted its culture around 2010. And what they did was really switched on the organization and inspired people towards a vision that was way beyond anything to do with software. Yeah, it was about the difference they could make in the world. And when you're thinking about a social media strategy, of course, it sits within a wider context, something else that you're trying to achieve, right? Social media, and it's the same with the CRM system I mentioned earlier. You know, these are just technologies that are enabling us to do something bigger and better. And so when we get into that kind of conversation, and the conversation about why, you know, the organization can't stay as it is, then you start to get onto something, because then people start to realize that actually this is quite important. Because otherwise it just becomes wallpaper like everything else we have to do in our daily life, which is always up to here. Everybody's got too much to do and not enough time, and too many emails, all these stuff. And, you know, adding social media and posting and all that stuff to it, it just makes the problem worse. And so, of course, there's a lot of friction there.
There is friction. And I'm trying not to smile around the fact that you've used the word conversation, and that this challenge often sits with marketers, and we're communicators, yet we do need to have these conversations internally. And I've added an S onto that, because this isn't just a one-off meeting, is it? This isn't just a, you know, I'm sure Microsoft didn't just have one meeting and go, oh, this is what we're going to do, this is how it's going to happen. So what's your advice on how can we have some quick wins, perhaps from one meeting, versus how long can organizational change, if there does need to be such a big shift in some areas? Talk about pace.
Yeah, so one of the key things really is to show visible progress. And, you know, one of the concepts that we work with our clients on is about shrinking the change, right? So if you've got this big, audacious goal, this great big thing, it might be inspiring, it might be worth reaching for. But at the end of the day, we've got to know what we're going to do next. Otherwise, it just becomes a sense of mission impossible. We just can't get there. So you have to break these things down. And what's really, you know, what's proven to it. In fact, this is actually what Microsoft did, was they took small projects. They didn't go big and grand and huge transformation, all this kind of thing. What Satya Nadella did was very smart. He actually worked on small teams, small groups, and got them to show a new way of working. Yeah, which then people started to look at and go, this is interesting. Okay, what's going on here? You know, these teams are innovating faster. They're getting there. You know, they're really, and actually seem to be really pumped up as well. Fantastic. What can we learn? And then people start to kind of get curious. Yeah, and then it starts to become. I hesitate to use the word infectious, given the last few years, but it becomes a sort of positive infection, and then people, you know, begin to adopt this new way of working. So if you can demonstrate the wins and the how-tos, and so people really mechanically know what to do at a small scale, and then it starts to grow. It starts to sort of create its own momentum, I suppose.
Yeah. I was laughing to myself, and again, this is a conversation that you and I have each week, but write a book on a to-do list is too big. Even writing down, oh, this week I'm going to write chapter 1, this week I'm going to write chapter 2, is too big. You have to break these things down into manageable small tasks. And I think that also applies to, I mentioned the word training and how-to training as well. You can't expect something to stick in a 3-hour session either, you know, especially if that's a listening session versus a how-to session. So in my book, in one of the chapters, I was thinking that actually there is a section on getting buy-in and what you present, and we'll come on to this. One of my book recommendations is a book called Marketing in the Boardroom by Ruth Saunders, that does talk about using their language, how marketers need to be better at marketing. Lots of tips for kind of presentations and breaking it down, and what do they need to know. What other, with your client work, Mark, experience of kind of trying to get that buy-in once you've done the work of, these are the tasks, this is what I know needs to happen, this is where I want to get to, how can we then start getting others involved to do it?
Well, I think as you know, kind of pointed out earlier, this is really about keep reinforcing the why, because you rightly said, you know, what often happens is that it ends up just being one big all hands meeting. Everybody gets all whoop and fancy about it. But the reality is nothing. You know, people go away, they do their day job, and the whole sort of all the energy of that situation just sort of dissipates in the day-to-day, the grind that everybody has to go through. So this has to be a constant reinforcement. And again, continually looking at, and bearing in mind the board members are still just people, right? They're still humans. Therefore, they're subjected to, they're subject to the same kind of stuff that we all are, the human condition, if you like, the things, that emotional connection we have to things. So if you want to win, your board colleagues over or the wider organization, the principles are exactly the same. You give people a great reason to get on board, and you make it easy for them to do so. Understanding the sources of friction, the things that are going to get in the way. Time is a big one, right? We're all time constrained.
Yeah.
And so, and so therefore, of course, the antidote to time is making this a really big focus. And then again, back to the why. So it's that constant sort of circular process of reinforcing why it's important, being together on that across the board. So the whole executive team should be making this a priority for the reasons that's been discussed, not just because they say it is, but because there's a bigger reason. And then continually sort of finding ways to make it easier for the people, understand the sources of friction, free up some time for people through different ways, take some projects off the plate so they've got time to do this stuff. Because that's the biggest thing that many organizations fail to do. They continually try to do too much. And as we all know with the big to-do lists, right? What happens if you've got a massive to-do list? You end up probably not achieving any of them at all, because you look at it and you go, "Oh, I'm out."
Yeah.
So break it down, small pieces, things that you can tick off. Exactly like you said, Luan. It's, just write the introduction, right? Don't worry about all the book.
Yeah.
Just do the intro. That seems manageable, doesn't it? And it's finding that equivalent in this space.
Yeah, and I think we can talk about this. It's almost like break down those tasks, but then allocate time for those tasks as well, and understand how that works and works best for you as well in terms of the kind of the time management. And and if we need to go through a phase of procrastination first, before we can write those words, then again, that's a whole nother topic. And there's lots of articles and TED Talks if you Google procrastination and habits and everything else. But brings me on, you mentioned the word energy. Now, of course, I've said we've worked together for years, and I know your own applied change model very well, and energy is one area of that. So can you talk to us a bit more about energize as one of the elements that you focus on?
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of the biggest problems we see in a transformation setting is that not nearly enough time is spent really inspiring people, truly inspiring them at a gut level to get on board with change. Writers are in change space talk about this all the time. Cotter has got a whole book written on the heart of change. It's worded that way for a reason, right? And yet what often happens is we end up with this kind of rather bland presentation of facts and figures, and worse still, IT systems or social media platforms or things, right? Yeah. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Well, what they care about is what the company is reaching for. Yeah. What they care about, I mean, going back to the Microsoft example, they are looking to solve many, many problems in the world using technology, to make life better for people, right? They're going way beyond the tech. Tech's just, that's a thing, right? It's just going to get them there. Let's not focus on the tech. Let's not talk about CRM systems. Yeah. In this case of this life sciences client I mentioned, let's talk about the lives that will be saved when they get this stuff right. Yeah. Let's not talk about entering data in a CRM. Let's talk about capturing somebody's life story, their struggles. Yeah. The opportunities for them. Yeah. Let's talk about it that way, because that actually gets us. It just gets us more on board, more inspired. Yeah. And this is where it often goes wrong. So energize, really, as we call it, is about getting to that place. The why it matters. In other words, why we can't stay as we are. Yeah. Why now? Because we're all procrastinators, right? And we can put it off to next week. You know what? We probably will. Yeah. Yeah. Just got to be now, right? And emphasize that. And then, of course, paint that picture of this future that is really great. Really worth reaching for. If you get those three right, what happens is people start to come together. And all of those petty squabbles, all of those reasons for, excuses to the reasons why people haven't done stuff, they begin to sort of melt slightly. Yeah, there's a greater force forward. And reality is, as I said, many organisations don't pay nearly enough attention to that. So what you end up with is people nodding vigorously, because of course they will, and then doing nothing. The behaviours, nothing, right?
Yeah.
And in the end, the behaviours are the result of what you've done in terms of the inspiration or otherwise. If people don't feel inspired, don't feel they have an aspiration towards something else, what happens is they'll get distracted, they'll go and do other stuff because they're busy. And so you'll end up with a sense of ambivalence and nothing moves.
So you've got to keep on track with this program and keep going and keep focused and working on it. And this is always evolving. And what interested me in the research for the book, it ended up that we did a snapshot of research in March 2020, interesting times, then repeated it in November 2022. And this, culture change came up both times, and it still comes up in weekly conversations that I have and the stories that we share. And we've talked about it being within the organisation and wanted to make change based on CRM or social media or other activity, but all of this is happening in a bigger context of what's happening outside. And yes, we have had a global pandemic, we've had technology changes, we've got war and other disruptive things going on that does affect us, but has also ultimately changed the way that we live and work and think as well. So how is that impacting the world of change?
Well, exactly. I mean, there's a realization. I think Jack Welch said something along these lines, which is when the outside world is changing faster than the inside world within an organization, then the end is in sight, right? The only question is when. And it's true. If you think about any organism on the planet, any species, right? If they don't adapt to their environment, then they don't last. Yeah, it's a hard fact of life. And organizations are in the same space. And so what we're seeing, of course, is an acceleration due to different technologies in the pace or the need to change on the basis that if one organization doesn't, somebody else will. And they'll use these new technologies, whether it's AI, robotics, biotech, nanotech, and many other things that are going on right now that are all starting to converge and create new opportunities. There's hardly a sector that is immune from this. I think it's Ray Kurzweil from one of the Google, he's the head of AI for Google. So he knows a thing or two, right? And they've got a whole team of people who've been researching this stuff for 10 years. And his statement that he's made, he's gone in writing with this, is that the amount of change, technology change that we're going to see in the 21st century is something in the order of magnitude of 1,000 times more than we saw in the 20th. I mean, whether it's 1,000, whether it's 500, whatever, it's a lot more, right? So, and I think we're seeing that already. I mean, the emergence of ChatGPT showed us just a little sort of snippet of where this potentially can go. And I saw this in music with the internet, right? Just one technology completely revolutionized not just music, but film, gaming, and publishing, many, many other sectors. We'll see the same thing when you start to converge these technologies. Wow. So, it's just, in our world, adaptability is critical, and culture is critical. There's a saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast. The reality is that something like 80% of strategies, according to analysis by McKinsey and Boston and various others, actually don't get realized.
Yeah.
And it's culture that is getting in the way.
And we've also talked about this isn't an easy thing, is it? We're not going to answer this in the next few minutes, or organizations, even when they go seeking support, don't always get this right, and it is evolving, and we're not saying that this is an easy thing to do, but it is something that we need to be aware of.
And I think the key is to focus on the right things. We very often focus on the technology, and we focus on things like governance and plans and status reports and all this we get kind of caught up in this. In the end, it's about a group of people, whether it's 100 people, 100,000 people, right, all wanting the same thing and being prepared to put themselves out to get it. And this really is what we're aiming for. So at least if we take the focus in that direction, then we're going to start to have some better answers. Yeah. So like I said, start small. Pick a team of 10 or whatever, it doesn't matter, and then work with that and start they process, start something, showcase, and let it build naturally. That's how you change culture.
Yeah, keep communicating. We talk a lot about books and TED Talks and things like that. I've mentioned Marketing the Boardroom already. What books and resources can you recommend to people that are watching this session?
I think we might
got
be
stack.
short time, actually, you know. Yeah, so some interesting ones. So depends on your sort of flavors. I've always been a fan of Margaret Heffernan. She talks a lot about culture and strategy, and talks a lot of sense, frankly. On the behavioral side, Dan Ariely, Dan Gilbert, TED Talks, fantastic. Always show up well on that. And also, you know, there's a thing as well about a lot of this stuff is about how we perception. All right. So if you look at Rory Sutherland, for example, he's very much in the marketing space and got some very interesting views on perception. I love just very quickly, just that one that he talks about, which is, you know, things like HS2, right, which is in the press at the minute. And his view on that is, rather than spending all these billions on producing, you know, cutting through mountains and stuff, why don't we just actually spend a tiny fraction of that money on champagne, right, and give people, and Wi-Fi, yeah. So give people free champagne and a fantastic Wi-Fi. And you know what? That extra 15 minutes they spend, they won't care. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he's worthwhile. He's worth it.
Yeah, it sounds like a good investment. Mark, a huge thank you for doing this. I don't think we've got any questions in the chat. I think people are just watching and nodding and taking this in. So thank you for joining me for this conversation. The chat does stay open on LinkedIn events. If you want to continue, do connect with myself and Mark. This is part of the series. I have more events coming up, and some have been recorded already and are available. So for those that are watching live, thank you. If you've watched it recorded, thank you as well, and see you all soon.
Thank you.